Hi, I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
And you're listening to another ITPro Podcast Special Edition, brought to you in association with Specops Software, where we'll be tackling the thorny topic of password security.
The spread of coronavirus has added new levels of challenge and complexity to previously familiar situations. And for IT professionals, this includes identity and access management. As businesses transition to remote working, with many of them planning to support it on an ongoing basis and at scale, it's more important than ever for remote workers to be accessing corporate data in a secure manner.
The traditional security perimeter is now well and truly dead, and employees are accessing enterprise resources from a huge variety of locations and at highly variable times. So it's crucial for IT and security teams to understand and counter the new risks that this opens up. Here to discuss these challenges, as well as how to address them, is Specops Software's Head of Internal IT, Darren James. Darren, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Jane. I'll look forward to this discussion.
So Darren, first off, could you tell us a bit about Specops?
Absolutely. So Specops Software was founded back in 2001. So we've been going for nearly 20 years. We have offices, our head office is in Sweden. We have offices in Germany, in the US, in Philadelphia, in Toronto, and here in the UK. We specialise in really two areas of IT. The first, that's desktop management, which we're not here to talk about today, but primarily in password and identity management, which is what we're going to be talking about.
So, as we mentioned at the top of this episode, we've all transitioned very rapidly to remote working on a never-before-seen scale, which has introduced a number of challenges, but I think it's worth covering some of the challenges that previously existed in the before times. What were some of the main challenges that IT admins were previously grappling with when we were still largely working from the office?
That's a great question. I think it's a good benchmark to set. So really, Specops was founded, as I say, many, many years ago. And back then, before sort of advent of social media and smartphones, we still had the same problems that we had today. Whereas with the tools that you get from Microsoft, they really, and also the recommendations back then, the recommendations were largely the same across every single organization. So that's a 8 or 9 character password with some complexity in it. So, password 1 with a capital P, for instance, would be a perfectly good password. And of course, when that expires every 42 days, which is kind of the default and was always the default, then password 2 with a capital P would also be perfectly acceptable for any organization and any user. But of course, you, me, and the gatepost know that password 1 and password 2 aren't terribly good passwords. And this has been the problem throughout the last 20 years of Active Directory's history, and really still remains the same in most of the organizations around the world. And so key problem that needs to be solved is how can we improve the quality of our users' passwords? And that is what Specops primarily does with its solution called Specops Password Policy. Of course, once you've got a really good password though, the next thing, whether it's a password or a passphrase, the next thing is trying to make sure that when a user does need to change it, or if they happen to forget it, we have a good way of resetting that password. And that's where another solution that we provide called Specops UReset comes in. And that allows a user to securely authenticate and then reset their own password or unlock their account if they've locked themselves out. And again, that will display concisely and clearly what the rules are in your password policy as the user types their password or their new password in. So this can really help keep user uptime to a maximum. They don't have to sit in a queue on a Monday morning trying to contact the service desk. They can reset their password from any device and from any location at any time. And of course, no other human is involved in that process. So it's very, very secure. And we can avoid things like, what's your favorite color and what's the first film you went to see. And we can use the better forms of identity, such as Apple Touch ID, Face ID, Google Fingerprint, Google Authenticator Duo, just to name a few. So yeah, but those problems we've always had. But obviously, since the onset of social media and smartphones and the big uptake in cloud, this problem has become a lot worse, because now you've got people using single sign-on, so their AD credentials, to log into things like portal.office.com and Salesforce and all of the other sort of public-facing web portals that companies buy as software as a service type solutions. So now you're entering your password one with a capital P into a public facing web browser with potentially your work identity, and that's always been a problem. Another issue that you've had as well in the past is where users' passwords have expired and users have not known anything about it. Maybe they've been on holiday, on sabbatical, working from home, or just the traditional sort of road warrior traveling around. Suddenly their VPN doesn't work anymore. They can't pick up their emails anymore. They haven't done anything wrong. They haven't changed their passwords, but their password expired and they've known nothing about it. And that ability to update the cache credential on a workstation has been an issue, certainly for those roaming warriors. And of course, these days, as we've just discussed, that has now become a big topic for a lot of people. So letting people know that something's going to happen to their account in X many days has become a really important thing as well.
I was going to ask, actually, you've gone over the historical problems with regards to passwords and access management and stuff, but with everybody remote working, is it the same problems but transplanted, or a wider scale? If it's was just your on the road Salesforce and now it's literally everyone, or are there additional kind of password related challenges that have sprung up as a result of a shift to mass working at home?
Really, it's the same problem. I mean, most organizations have always, for a long time, had some sort of remote working, whether it's, an encouraged working from home sort of platform or policy, or whether they've had traveling salespeople or people just traveling around the world or around to different offices, even in the UK, just to have meetings, but still needing access to corporate resources of some kind. So I think that's always been the case. But now everybody's working from home. You've not just got a handful of people to deal with every 3 months when their password expire. You've got everyone in your organization to deal with. And that's where the big problems have come into play. And also, you've now got people that maybe have always worked in the office now having to work from home. So you've got training issues as well. So those road warriors are going to be your best users right now, because they've been using these remote ways of working for a long, long time. But now you've got lots of people who were always office-based now working from home, and you've got a whole, training situation involved as well, both cybersecurity and general usage of IT systems within your organization. So yes, Jane, all of those problems have been exacerbated umpteen-fold.
So with these issues that have been kind of transplanted to remote working, that have been plaguing IT admins for years, really, what procedures or solutions can they put in place to mitigate these problems?
Well, Specops has actually produced a couple of things directly in response to the COVID situation that we currently face. So we have a piece of freeware called Specops Password Auditor, which any domain admin level account can run within their organization, and that will identify any users that you currently have in your environment that are currently running a compromised password, based on a database of 738 million leaked password hashes. So that will, before COVID, we used to kind of tell people the headline number. This is how many accounts are running compromised passwords. But now, since we've had COVID hit the world, we've decided to open it up so you get the full version of that piece of software for free until the end of this year. And so once you have that information is power, as they say. Once you have that information, again, you can identify those users most at risk, maybe your VIP users or people that hold access to particularly sensitive information, and encourage those users to change their passwords. And of course, once they've changed them, there's nothing to stop you from running that report again and checking that their new passwords aren't compromised in any way. And produces a bunch of other reports as well, things like identical passwords. So if you have those, I'm sure you guys have never done it, but I'm sure, we have heard of some admins that have an admin account and a user account, and, maybe they've been tempted in the past to set the same password for both accounts, which obviously none of us or none of the people listening to this podcast would ever do. But yeah, it can identify things like that, as well as another really nice tool which will tell you whose passwords are going to be expiring in the next 2, 3, 4, 6, 52 weeks as well. So again, if you don't have any notification tools in play, you can see who's going to be impacted, so you can be proactive about contacting those users before they just suddenly stop working and they've got nowhere else to turn apart from the service desk. Also, we've released Specops password notification, which allows you to send an email to your users X many days before their passwords expire. And that is available for free again until the end of this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a bit more dramatic if somebody's working from home and they can't get anything done versus them, annoying as it may be for IT administrators to have somebody appear by their desk and be like, I can't get into my stuff, or my computer is broken, or whatever.
Correct.
Not that I would ever do that to our darling IT teams at Dennis Publishing. I wouldn't dream of it. But yes, if I can't, or if a user can't physically come to you, then it's a bit of a problem once everything's actually kicked off already.
And what you've brought up there, Jane, is another big problem that's actually now hit since COVID. And that is, how does a service desk identify that person who's on the other end of the line? And again, Specops has a solution for that with something we call Specops Secure Service Desk. So now you can, if someone calls the service desk up, we can ask them verification data based on stuff that's in Active Directory already. So it might be their personal email, their work email, their mobile number. We can send them text messages and give them numbers to read back to the service desk, so the service desk can verify that identity. Because that social engineering aspect of cyber attacks has been on the increase since COVID as well, because there's no way of physically identifying somebody, or not an easy way, especially in larger companies.
Yeah, and like you say, with the kind of, everyone thinks of, everybody who was based in the office who has ended up, working from home. But then you've got those people who were, kind of road warriors who all worked, say as a salesperson in the branch for hardware store or something like that. And now actually they're not moving around at all. I don't know. I've not really thought about it from that aspect before either. It's quite kind of another interesting challenge, and they're facing similar challenges even though they're used to remote working.
Yep. So these are all sort of very kind of on point topics for today's climate. And as you say, like it or not, probably the new normal for quite some time.
So we've spoken a little bit already about some of the problems, shall we say, with insecure passwords, particularly, passwords based on easily guessable keywords, patterns, that kind of thing. But what are the other kind of major pitfalls of password security, and what can we do to make passwords in and of themselves stronger?
Well, you're absolutely right. So it's all well and good running a report, letting people know that they're currently running a compromised password. But how do we make sure that the next password that user sets isn't going to be compromised? And that is where our paid solution, Specops Password Policy, comes into place. So Microsoft have still got that same policy today as they had 20 years ago. It doesn't matter if you're running Server 2019 or Windows Server 2000, it's still 3 out of the 5 character types, last 24 passwords remembered, expires at a fixed date and time, those sorts of things. Specops Password Policy has been designed to take into account all of the new advice that's come out from the NCSC and NIST over the past 4 years. So the adoption of passphrases, for instance, instead of passwords. So things like 3 random words that mean something to you and nothing to anybody else. Not "May the force be with you." That might be a phrase as we call it in the dictionary, but it's not a very good passphrase because every man and his dog has probably used that at some point in the past. So when I say 3 random words, it might be, the first car you've ever bought, the first school you've went to, your mother's maiden name, some words that are 3 very easy words for you to remember, but very hard for somebody else to guess. And of course, if they're sort of 6 or more characters in length, if you put those 3 together, you end up with a 20 plus character password ish, and then you're well on the way to having a very good, strong password. And that doesn't need to have complexity in it. It doesn't need to have a capital letter or a number or a special character in it to make it complex. Just a very long password will mean that that is a much more secure than a complex, shorter, say 14 character or less password. Much harder to break than a complex, shorter password.
So this concept is one that some listeners and some non-technical business users might find slightly tricky to grasp, and something that might seem initially a little bit counterintuitive. How does one 20-character password that has no numbers or symbols in it, how is that more secure than a shorter password that has kind of special characters and numbers and symbols throughout it? And there's one XKCD cartoon.
That's right, yeah.
that I think explains this quite well. And it's based on the concept of entropy, particularly in relation to passwords. But why does entropy make seemingly more complex passwords actually less secure than longer but less complex ones?
Right. Well, unfortunately it's all down to a very boring topic of mathematics. So it's really down to how easy it is for a computer to guess a password versus how easy it is or difficult it is for you to remember one. So if you've got a shorter, complex password with only 12 characters in it, and maybe it's got I think their example is Troubadour 83 with capital T's and zeros and signs instead of 8s and those sorts of things.
Good memory.
Yeah, I've looked it up myself. I use it as an example. But yeah, Troubadour 83, that's only got so many bits of entropy. So if you guess that maybe you can make 1,000 guesses per second on a brute force attack on that sort of password, you can crack that password just using brute force against a traditional web service in probably around 3 days-ish. I think that was the numbers that they used on that particular meme or blog post. However, if you have a longer password, so I think it was correct stable battery horse or something like that from the so 4 random words which mean nothing to anybody, that has a level of entropy of 44, which means it would take sort of 550 years to brute force that password. And sure, you have to bear in mind even that meme isn't perfect, because if somebody knows that your passphrase is made up of 3 random words and they all have to be plus 6 characters long, they can easily download an online version of an English dictionary, filter out all of the words that are 6 characters in length, and then use those words in various combinations to crack even a long passphrase like I've just described. But this is why I always try to recommend people use things like names rather than dictionary words, because they won't appear in those dictionaries. And if you can spice it up with a number or a capital letter somewhere along the line, or separate the words with spaces or dashes or whatever it might be, then again, you're adding to that level of entropy all the time. So that's why. But shorter, complex passwords, just very, very easy to crack. It doesn't matter that you've got different character types. They can just blast through the whole thing in a few days. But the longer it is, it's much, much harder to brute force attack those passwords. But again, you still have to be careful. You can't just think, oh yeah, it's going to work because it's longer. Because as we've already suggested, may the force be with you, or we all live on a yellow submarine, aren't good passphrases. So there, there's many arguments as to what makes a good or a bad password or a passphrase, but I think the three names that mean something to you. Oh, the other thing as well to bear in mind is the human factor. So if you ask someone to write down a 20-character complex and use a 20-character complex password or a passphrase, most people would struggle, wouldn't they? They'd say, they'd end up writing it down on a Post-it note and sticking it under their keyboard. So again, you've got that human factor of weak security as well. So if it's 3 easy to type words with no complexity requirements, your users usually don't have to write them down and stick them on Post-it notes around your monitor, those sorts of things as well. So, you've got to think about that aspect of cybersecurity as well, the human aspect.
I was going to say, I think that, people or humans can be very much the enemy of the password because we want things, in trying to be random, we end up being predictable. Yeah. My dad won't use password lockers because he doesn't believe in writing down his passwords. And so he gets phished instead.
Exactly. I mean, and that's another big problem is that you will always get some people who go, no, I don't trust any of it, or I'm not the best typist in the world. I'll never be able to type 20 characters in a row. So we have another solution which can reward users for setting a longer password. So if they set a 9 to 14 character password, the reason I use 14 is where really weak landman hashes stop working, or 15 really is where they stop working. 14 is the uppermost character limit of a landman hash, which is what Windows basically stores your password as. So if you set a really weak password up to 14 characters, even with complexity, will expire every 45 days. But if you set a 15 and above character password, we'll let you keep it for a year. Or maybe if you set a 15 to 20 character password, we'll let you keep it for a year. And if you set a 21 and above character password, you never have to change it again, which is one of the recommendations from the NCSC and NIST, that you should set users' passwords to never expire. But I must admit, I don't actually agree with that particular piece of advice, because even if you have the best passphrase in the world, and your work has just told you passphrases are the future, this is what you should use. Well, first of all, I'd say MFA is the future. So first of all, but we can't get there obviously just yet. But if we do have to use passwords, there is no guarantee that amazing passphrase that you've just set today will be an amazing passphrase tomorrow. Because if you go home and reuse it on your supermarket reward card account, or your Dunkin' Donuts account, or whatever it might be, another third-party website, because work told you this was an amazing passphrase, it only takes that system to become compromised, and then that amazing passphrase is out in the open. And most organizations don't even realize they've been hacked. I think the average was 2 years. I think Yahoo, for instance, when they were hacked, it was 2 years after the fact was when they actually realized they'd been compromised. So, setting users' passwords to never expire, probably not such a good idea, but certainly let them keep those longer passwords for longer is a much better way of doing it. And of course, that stops the pushback you might get from the business. The business might say, well, no, we can't work with this. This is terrible. We're never going to be able to get all of our users to switch to passphrases. Fine, that's okay. We can still support those guys that don't want to do it. They're just going to have to change their passwords a little bit more frequently than the people that can adopt passphrases. And most users, if you speak to them and you give it to them in terms that they understand, they'll go, okay, so you're telling me if I put 14 characters in, I have to change it for every 45 days. But if I put 15 characters in, I can keep it for a year. And you say yes. Oh, well, okay, then I'll put 15 characters in. Everybody wins. The user wins because they don't have to change their password for a year, and IT wins and the security team wins because everybody's got a strong password.
The cynic in me, of course, is tempted to suggest that then people will just go, password.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why we've got a rule in our password policy product that says do not allow consecutive identical characters. So all those naughty people that type password 11111111 to get up to 20 characters will get a big NO next to their name. So we've thought about things like that. Password policy, as I say, has been around for nearly 20 years now. Specops password policy, so it's had a lot of levels of polish applied to it. So we've got businesses from 25-man band finance houses all the way up to 100 or 200,000 user governments and government departments that use this product. So it's well polished, and all of those little gotchas that or workarounds that users come up with are pretty much covered.
So, Darren, you've mentioned the fact that obviously, if you've got a great 20 plus, character password at work and you're being rewarded for it, there is a danger that you're going to take that reward incentive and apply this excellent password everywhere. How can that be combated? What kind of level of education, what technology is available for it? For example, I think Specops has something called Password Blacklist that can help with this.
That's correct. So we have Specops Password Policy has a premium add-on called Specops Password Blacklist. Blacklist is a little bit like Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned website, but on steroids. So Troy's done a fantastic job over the past few years gathering up all of these databases, and he continues to do so, and we very, very much applaud him for doing that sort of work. But what we had was some requests from our customers. Sure, we've already got dictionaries built into password policy already, so you could block ITPro, for instance, and Nottingham, and all of the sort of common words that might relate to your business. We can already do that in password policy. But we had a lot of requests from our customers saying, well, can we block every single password that's ever been leaked ever? Because that's kind of the guidance that again is coming out from the NCSC and NIST. If we want to switch, users' passwords should never expire, then we need to make sure that every leaked password has been blocked. And we got a lot of questions around, can we download Troy Hunt's database and import it into password policy? And the answer is theoretically yes, you can do that. The problem with Troy's database is that it's huge. It's a great big file, and it needs to be loaded into memory on all of your DCs. And most organizations don't have that much memory assigned to their domain controllers. So there was a bit of a problem there. So what we decided to do was to take the problem away from the customer and help them instead by managing that database themselves. And what we decided to do was, obviously, we can't rely on Troy to carry on, creating a database for us that we could use. But what we could do is go and have a look at all of the hacking news groups and forums and websites and create our own database. And what we found over the last sort of 18 months that this has been running is that we haven't got 578 million passwords or genuinely leaked unique passwords in our database. We've got just over 2.5 billion unique leaked passwords in our database. So we host that up on the cloud, and we update that more or less on a daily basis. We have a team of DevOps guys that sits there monitoring all of these websites and news groups and forums, and every time they see a leak, we download that new version of the database. We decrypt it if it's already encrypted. We rehash it into the hashes that we use in our database, and we upload any unique entries, any new unique entries to our database. And so it's kind of like a virus definition, if you like. It's never going to be 0 day. So if there's a leak today, we're not going to have that password in our database tonight or today. It might take us some time, especially if it's encrypted, to decrypt it first and then add it. But it's certainly a lot better than, as far as I know, any other solution out there.
Now, we've talked previously on this podcast about the idea of passwordless security, the use of technologies like biometric authentication or behavioral authentication to replace traditional passwords. But do you think we'll see passwords becoming less prevalent in the future?
The answer to your question is yes. Absolutely. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, MFA is the way forward for all of IT. We want any system that you interact with, having something as the way of identifying yourself really isn't a great way of proving that identity, because it's quite easy for someone else to steal it or guess it. So something that you have and something that you are, so your biometrics and your phone, let's say, are always going to be much better than something that you know. Of course, if you can merge those things into something like Apple Touch ID, Face ID, Google Fingerprint, all of those sorts of things, so something you have, something you know, and something you are all into one thing, then that's great. It's really convenient for the user. And really good for the IT security guy as well. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right. The problem is we don't really have any standards. So we've got Apple ID, and we've got Apple Touch ID, and we've got Google Fingerprint, and then we've got Windows Hello for Business, and there's a bunch of different stuff out there. And that's the issue. When you have all of these different identity services, you've only got one common one still available to everybody. And guess what that is? Yeah, the password. It's very, very easy to implement. Every user understands it because they've been using it since the year dot. But ultimately, yes, I think you're right. The more people get used to biometric authentication with their fancy iPhones and iPads and Android devices, and I think the greater the acceptance will be that is the better way to do things. But it still concerns me that things like Office 365 logins still require a password to authenticate you as one of the factors. You have to use the password plus something else. I mean, again, Specops has a solution for this, funnily enough, where you don't have to use a password to log into Office 365. We have our own solution for that. So a lot of people look at the auditor's report saying you must have MFA for your cloud-based solutions, and they go, okay, Office 365 MFA, that's free, brilliant, great, and they tick the box. And they don't look under the cover, and they don't see that a password is still a required ID service plus something else, plus Microsoft Authenticator or a text message or whatever it might be. So you still have that situation where someone walks into a web cafe in North Korea and opens up portal.office.com or whatever it might be, has to type in their username and then their Active Directory password, then get a text message, and then wonder why the other system that they log into that doesn't have MFA but relies on their password is suddenly compromised because they've just typed their password into an unprotected system that's been monitored by something nefarious. So, if we can move away from that, great. But there's still a lot of work to do. And people have been forecasting the death of the password really for the last 20 years. And we're still here today. We're still talking about it today.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in this special edition, so I'm afraid we'll have to bring our discussion to a close. Thanks once again for joining us, Darren.
No problem. It's been my pleasure.
If you want to improve your password security, you can download Specops' free password auditor tool by following the link in the episode description.
To hear more from ITPro, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as signing up for our daily newsletter. We'll be back on Friday with our regularly scheduled episode, but until then, goodbye.
Bye.
The ITPro podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.